But what I look for is distress situations. I don't want a distressed business. I want a really great business that happens to be in a distressed situation.
Welcome to the Mad Profit Podcast, where we interview active investors, entrepreneurs, and experts who left corporate jobs to buy or start successful ventures and live life on their own terms. Listen to their stories, learn from their experiences, and heed their advice so you too can create mad profits and the life you've always wanted. And now, here's your host, Laurent Truc.
Ace, welcome to the Mad Profit Podcast. Thank you for joining us.
It is good to be here. You know, it's always special when I get to do these with folks that I've had the opportunity to work with. You and I have been working together for a little while. So thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, thanks for accepting. I think I've learned so much from you over the few years that we've been working together and some of the deals that we've done. So I think there's a lot to extract from you during this short time together. So I'm looking forward to it. So why don't we start a little bit with your journey? I know you have a pretty interesting background. So can you give a little bit of what got you here to the audience?
Yeah, I guess it's been a bit untraditional. You know, my dream as a kid was one day I want to like own a big business and make a lot of money and that kind of thing. And so the path that we're all told to do that is to get into the best school that you possibly can, make really great grades, and, you know, you get hired, you get to learn a lot. And so, you know, when I was young, growing up in inner city, we had a school that was an all-boys school that was Macaulay, and just really great school. It's nationally ranked or whatever as a high school. And before going there, I really didn't care much about school, but it was very challenging and kind of got engaged. And then after that, got into Colgate, which is, you know, top 20 school in the US. And so I was all about education. And you know, I knew I had to get a full ride. My parents could not afford, which back then was 40 grand a year. I don't even know what it is now, but 40 grand a year, whatever it was, when my parents could not afford that. So ended up getting this scholarship, huge win. And my sophomore year, everything changed. You know, I'm making good grades, you know, president of the class, just loving school. And a buddy of mine comes to me who was a programmer. And this is back in the day on instant messenger and chat rooms and those kind of things.
Oh,
and,
God.
you know, I've always been a business nerd and into the stock market and had been a member of this website called Cool Wall Street and had built up this internet friendship with a guy who had built it. And he while he was building that, he built this other project that was growing a lot faster than it. And he basically came to me and said, "Hey, I want to sell this business. You've been really involved as a client, and you know, I'm wondering if you know anybody that would want to buy it." And I'm like, "Dude, I'm 19 years old. Like, I'm in college, out in the middle of nowhere in New York. Like, no, I don't know anybody that wants to buy this thing." But I was curious. I'm like, just as a user and as somebody who was interested in business, I'm like, but, you know, how much money is it making? What do you want to sell it for? And he actually sent me all the information. And I'm pouring over it. He was making about 60 grand a year off of this one. And he wanted to sell it for 70 grand. And I didn't know anything about valuations or if that was a good price or a bad price. But what I did know is that I'm spending 40 grand a year. I'm in my second year. I spent 80 grand so far in college, or that was the cost. I was fortunate on scholarship, but it's cost 80 grand. And I know people that are graduating from this great institution that are getting out after spending 120,000 and they're only making 30,000. So that was like, you know, in real estate, my comparable. My comparable was how much it cost to go to Colgate versus what my friends were making when they left. And I'm like, okay, 70 grand for 60 grand sounds comparably like a really good deal.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking I got 3 grand in the bank, so it doesn't really matter. I can't buy this thing. So I developed some websites and stuff over the summer, saved up $3,000. But that's a big gap from 70. So it was one of those things, I'm sure you've had that experience where it's just nagging at me, like, man, I gotta figure out a way to buy this thing. So I went to a buddy of mine on campus that did have, he came from a lot of money, and I'm like, hey, I got this opportunity to buy this site. And he liked the deal. He agreed that it made sense, just based off of my college cost logic. And he was like, all right, all I got is 15 grand, but I'll put it in with you. I'm like, all right. So I'm getting closer. I'm up to, 18,000 now. But still way a long way away from 70, and went back to the guy. He was willing to finance 35,000 of it. So, I still had to come up with about 12. And this is when I did the thing that I don't recommend anybody do, because back in the day, which I don't know if this is still on college campuses, but they would, it's really predatory when I think about it now, but you would have all of these credit card companies that would sit on campus and give out t-shirts and little tchotchkes and stuff. And we're college kids. We don't know anything about money or whatever, but it's like, t-shirt looks cool. And all I gotta do is sign this paper. Like I don't have to pay anything for it. So I am talking to the guy and I'm like, hey, like, how can I get money off of the credit card? And that was when I learned about, like, you get these checks and, like, it's basically an advance. It was a terrible, terrible idea for any college kids that are listening to this, but a better idea than spending all the money on beer. So
yes, very true.
So I ended up getting the rest of the 12,000. And, I always say on these things, I essentially, actually it ended up being 17. So I ended up borrowing about 17,000. But I always say on these things, my biggest fear at that point was that they would send the statements to my actual home address instead of like my college address. So like every month before they sent the bill, I was like, call them like, please do not send this to my house. So fast forward about 6 months later, I'm going home for school from college for vacation, and basically the business ends up growing like crazy, and I actually made the really tough decision. It was a tough decision for me at that point to leave college, because there was no Mark Zuckerberg at that point. There weren't all the people that we see now that was like, oh no, like that could be a path. It was like, am I making the worst decision of my life? And I will vividly remember I was dating a girl and told her I wasn't coming back. And she was like, Ace, you're going to go bankrupt. You need to get back up here and finish school. This is not going to work. What are you thinking? So, that was the beginning of this journey. And the big mind shift for me there was I can actually buy income. The same way that we buy a house, the same way that we buy a car, you can, and you don't have to have all the money up front. Very few people pay all cash for their house or their car. You can figure out how to get the money, and you can actually buy income. And that was a huge, huge mind shift for me.
Wow. And how did you, so I guess you were using the platform. So you already had the vision of what you felt needed to be improved, the opportunity of networking it out to find other customers. Like, there must have been fear. I mean, that's a lot of credit card debt to take on.
It was. A little bit of it was my naivety. My naivety basically worked in my favor. That's why I say, looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness, young Ace, you could have ruined yourself. But I did. I knew the business. I knew that it was being run poorly, and I didn't really understand why. But after figuring out that the guy had this other business that was this large thing, that was kind of the encouragement to know, okay, the customers were complaining, the site was down all the time. There was just very simple responding. Like, he just wouldn't respond to people because he was so busy. And so I'm like, man, like, I can definitely grow this thing. And I remember, it was making really, for a college kid, that was a lot of money. One of the other funny things that happened during that time was I was home working on the business that summer, and you got to keep in mind the internet back then was a very early I mean, they're just like, people weren't using it even a ton, older people especially. So my parents, I remember my dad like weekly, just like, are you gonna get a job this summer? And I'm like, Dad, I have this business and it's this stock market business. And he's like, so you're investing in the stock market? And I'm like, no, I'm not investing in the stock market, but it's a platform and people are paying, like, I have advertisers that pay. And he's like, that just doesn't, like, you need to get a job. So all summer, he's like on me, you gotta get a job. I'm trying to explain. I'm just like, forget it. And I remember getting to the end of the summer, and I had some investors that wanted to invest in the business. So there was this article with a write-up, and they didn't want me to go back to school. They're like, we'll invest and help take the business to the next level, but you won't be able to go back to school. So I go and I sit my parents down. I'm like, hey, I got this tough decision to make. I was fully planning on just saying no. I just wanted to get their thoughts. And I knew they were going to be like, are you crazy? You got a freaking 40,000 a year scholarship. Like, you're taking your butt back to college. So I tell them, I got these investors. They want to put money into this thing. And, but they don't want me to go back to school. They want me to take a year off or whatever. Mm-hmm. And my dad was like, why do investors want to invest in this thing? And it's like, it's only making internet money. And I'm like, Dad, like, it's making like regular money. It's like, yeah, but that's like internet money. I'm like, so my dad really came up with the idea for Bitcoin, like way before Satoshi. So I'm explaining that this is real money. I show him a check from DoubleClick, which is a company that Google bought. And he's like, it was like a $12,000 check at that point. And he's like, oh my goodness, you're being scammed. Somebody's like using you. Like, we got to get down to the bank. He like takes me like, we got to go to the bank right now. We literally get in the car, go to the bank. We walk in and he's like, I need to talk to somebody. My son's getting scammed. He's getting these checks, like shows them the check. And he's like, and you've been depositing these checks? Like, why didn't you tell me? It's like, I tried to tell you several times. You just told me to get a job. So the person comes back and he's like, no, this is like a $500 million company. Like, it's legit, all this stuff. So yeah, one of the funniest things, like, we get back in the car and he just looks at me. He's like, and you're thinking about going back to school? Are you crazy?
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
So yeah, that was the beginning.
Yeah. Very cool. I love those stories because it makes me think about my kids and, my kids who love gaming and things. They're like, why are you wasting your time? Like, God knows what he's going to be able to do with that when he gets older.
Yeah, it's so tough. I have it with my nephews where I'm just like, you wanna get them in the path that kind of you understand and you see, but at the same time, things are changing so fast that we didn't have anybody in our time that was making millions of dollars playing video games.
Yeah, it's crazy. So walk me through. I mean, that's a big jump from being 19, building a business to what your world looks like today. So what has that evolution looked like? What are you doing now?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. The recession / .com bust happened in 2001. So this whole thing started in '99. Ran the business, had employees, all of this. Actually got a good return because of the income from the business, but then in the end sold it for pennies on the dollar after the .com bust because most of our advertisers were those people. Mm-hmm. And so after that, I actually wrote the internet off for years, ended up doing a lot of offline businesses, bought a mortgage company, a string of tanning salons, some retail businesses, just a lot of different deals, franchise businesses, and had a lot of those and real estate and some different things. And every once in a while, I still dabble in the internet deal. And years later, I kind of looked at my portfolio and realized, like, on a time investment basis, trying to manage the different offline businesses, looking at the real estate and comparing both of those to the internet deals, the ROI was just unreal. And it was very obvious at that point for a couple reasons. One is scalability in the number of deals that I could do and manage and still have the lifestyle that I want. But the other is just diversification and being able to have a lot of different things without having to learn a whole new skill set personally. You know, if you're somebody that has a hair salon one day and the next day you're buying a restaurant, those are two totally different things. Online, you can have a business that's in the hair space and still get that kind of exposure, selling products or even having some kind of service where you're sending hairstylists to houses. You know, there's just all these different options. And you can have something that's selling a monthly food box subscription kind of business that's been set out, and then have some exposure to the food industry. And those skill sets are going to be really, really similar. So between those things, like, okay, and I also had a desire to have some location independence. Mm-hmm. And even with managers, you know, I had about 34 units in real estate. Even with managers and having people that are there on the ground, it was always some headache that was coming up with the real estate. So I sold all of that. And just so happens that this was 2007, and so that was I got ahead of that 2008 debacle. But you know, it was kind of not because I was an oracle or anything. It was just realizing like, oh, let me get into this internet thing. So that was fortuitous. And now today, you know, manage over 40 internet businesses. Is always going in between, you know, 40 and 45. We're selling different things, doing transactions. You and I just did a transaction together. Sometimes we're selling the business, but then between the buyers, I'll keep equity. And so, you know, have all these internet businesses that are, you know, have different people involved. And then I also manage a private equity fund that owns about 9 kind of larger entities.
It's amazing. What a journey. What a journey.
Yeah.
How did you, I mean, those are eclectic, different businesses that you put together under that umbrella, especially when you were working more brick and mortar. Do you have a methodology you use to select the businesses you want to get into? Hair salon and, you know, something completely different. Like you said, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of switching focus and getting to learn a new industry. So how do you pick them? How do you decide?
So when I was doing the offline businesses and doing the tanning salons and things like that, that's a really great example. What I look for is at that point, and then I'll talk about now as well. But what I look for is distress situations. I don't want a distressed business. I want a really great business that happens to be in a distressed situation. So, you know, the only reason I ever bought a tanning salon, I never walked into a tanning salon. The first time I ever walked into a tanning salon, I actually put together a contract to buy it. And the reason was really simple. So, you know, I go to this tanning salon. The lady had put on Craigslist that she had to sell. Her and her husband were moving to Europe. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about a distressed situation. So it wasn't so much like, oh, I need to sell this because I'm losing a ton of money. It was, I got this situation, I have to leave. So I go and I meet her at the salon. We walk through, you know, she's literally explaining how tanning works and the beds and like just how the business works, like, you know, and this little walkthrough and the spray tan and just all this stuff. For those not watching on video, I'm Black. So I had no reason to ever go into a tanning salon in my life. So I walk through and we're looking at the bed, talking through all this stuff. I'm like, okay, like, man, I don't know if I want to buy this thing. I don't know anything about this. The numbers look pretty decent. But then we sit down and we're going through her, you know, kind of the numbers and all this. I'm like, so what about your database of customers? And she's like, yeah, we've got like 18,000. We've got a database of 18,000 people. I was like, wow, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And, you know, what information do you have? She's like, oh, we have like, a lot of them have emails. Almost all of them have phone number because that's required. And most of them have like mailing. I'm like, oh, great. So how often are you contacting those people? And she was like, what do you mean? I'm like, how often do you like send a coupon or anything or, you know, remind them that you're here, whatever. She's like, oh, we don't do that. And I'm like, oh, okay, like never. And she's like, I would never want to bother my customers. I'm not the type of business person that's going to bother my customers. And I was like, so you have never mailed them? And she was like, never, never. And I'm like,
Wow, that's incredible.
okay, I think I'm gonna buy this. And I made her an offer. Literally got on her computer, typed out the LOI because she didn't have that much time. She was leaving in like a short period of time, and that was the first one. And then it became interesting because there was at the same time she gave me basically a big discount because the federal government was doing this thing where they were trying to discourage tanning, so they were doing a 10% tax, and all the tanning salon owners were nervous about this. And in my head, it's interesting. This is such a big lesson, I think, for people in looking at opportunities. I think when the industry's done something for a long time, or it's worked a certain way, and there's something that is a big change for a lot of people, it's more of the scare, and they spend a lot of time lobbying against this. And so when it got approved, all the tanning salon owners were just like, oh, this is the end of the industry. They're trying to kill our businesses. And, and I'm like, I mean, you could just charge 10% more. Or, you could charge 5% more and make 5% less. Like, we're literally selling electricity here. Like, this is, we're selling electricity for a lot of money into a light bulb. Like, we got pretty strong margins here. So it was really interesting that there was this big panic, is essentially what it was in the industry. And I just started buying them. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right, man. This is the end now. I'm not going to buy it for that much because as we know, like, this is the end of the tanning industry.
Yeah.
So I end up buying really 5 of them, and then a 6th one that I just bought the inventory out of, and years later packaged together. So
That's incredible. Very cool.
So that's what I was looking for at the beginning, and I kind of took a little bit of a deep dive there. But a thing that I look for now is a lot different, because what I'm looking for is situations. Like, I want to be able to buy a business and then buy a complementary business where we can cross promote those. So, if I have a business that's in the hotel space, like our openrooms.com, then I also want to, and that business has like over 1 million emails. And I want to buy a business in the airfare space, like the airfare watchdog business that has like 500,000 emails. And now, like, my goal is that I'm not, I don't want to have to pay for ads. I don't want to have to pay Facebook for ads. I would rather go and find a way to grow that business by buying another profitable business. Mm-hmm. So now, instead of me having an expense for advertising, I literally can have an asset that's making me money. That's the advertising. So that's the goal now. It's looking for those businesses that have strategic values that complement each other.
That's brilliant. Do you feel you're at that point because you've created enough of a diversified portfolio? So now it's not about the diversification; it's about piling on to get better value from what you already have.
Yeah, I think it becomes easier, but I think at the very beginning, that's where you want to think. And the interesting thing is, you don't have to buy the business. You could just look at your business and say, okay, how could if I didn't buy those 2 businesses, I could go to an airfare business and say, hey, let's do a joint venture together. Like, right now, I'm spending this money, but I can create this opportunity and do a joint venture for you. So I think it's more about that shift in way of thinking and how you look at the deals, even more than, obviously we do have a lot of those businesses. And then sometimes just buying the exact same business. We've got one business, this whiteboard agency, and we're literally in the middle right now of closing another deal that's literally just a same business. So, in those cases where we've got duplicated expenses, we're able to get rid of, and some different opportunities there.
Very cool. So I talk a lot to a lot of individuals that are currently in jobs, and either they're trying to get a side hustle going or they're looking to leave their businesses. And they always ask me, like, why would I spend the money to buy a business? And, the cost of starting a website really is not a lot. It's a domain name and, a little bit of programming. Share with us your philosophy on buying versus building.
Yeah, a little bit of it is, or at least the peek into it is what I was mentioning earlier. It's not so much that it's the worst thing ever. to build a business. I think there's a lot of experience and things that can be gained. What happens though is for the person that has a goal of income, they're getting distracted by something that isn't really what they're even looking to do. So if you're looking for a car, sure, like you could go to mechanic school or start looking at videos online, start buying a bunch of parts. You can do it. Like you can build a car. And the funny thing is, it's actually easier to build a car than to build a business. Because if you do everything the right way, the car is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But people understand that that's outrageous. Like, I don't have time to do that. I don't want to figure that out. It just doesn't make sense. What I want is to just be able to drive a car. And I think that people have confused what they want just because there's a lot of advertising around books, around entrepreneurship, podcasts around starting from scratch. There's just a lot of information, and we celebrate that as the path to getting to the income. But the truth is, like, what you want is the income. It's not, just like it's not about building the car. You want to be able to drive the car. You want to be able to get the income. And I think that people don't understand that they can just go by the income, or that that's a path. And I think one of the things that is a second, because most of it is just psychological. And the second psychological shift is what's expensive. For me, my most valuable asset is not my money. It's not any of the things I have or I can buy. Like, none of that stuff has any value to even come close to the value of my time. Mm-hmm. So when I'm investing time into something, that's way more costly to me than me spending the money. So I would much rather, and if you get into that kind of fundamental thing, because that's what the person really has to say. What the person has to say when they say, hey, it's so much less expensive for me to build a business than to buy one. What that person has to say is, I want my money more than I want my time. Which is crazy. Like, my money is more important to me than I'll spend my time on this business, but I'm not spending my money. So that's outrageous. Like, it literally doesn't make sense. So it's just that people aren't using logic. Like, if you use logic, the most logical thing is, let me spend just the same way. Like, people can't, and then you get the thing of like, well, I can't afford it. It's like, you can't afford a lot of things. Like, people can't afford to get to college, but they will figure out, like, where do I go to get this money? So mm-hmm. The same way that there's money for college out there, there's money for cars out there, there's money for houses out there, there's actually money for you to buy the business that's out there. And once you value your time enough, then you're willing to do that work so that you don't have to spend a lot of time in something. And it's just I think there are some people that are like Steve Jobs. I'm not one of them. There are people like Elon Musk, and we need those people that are just super talented, super driven. They've got a specific vision, and honestly, they change the world. Mm-hmm. But for the average, when you look at Steve Jobs' movie, like, even just looking at his life, like, I love what he's built. I've got my iPad right here, but I don't want his life.
Yeah.
Like, I don't envy his life at all. So for me, I think there are a lot of average folks that could be in a successful business if they went the route of buying it as opposed to trying to start from scratch, which is, I call the entrepreneurial lottery, where just the odds are greatly, greatly against you. It's tough to buy something that's successful and continue to make it work. To start from scratch is just you are fighting a uphill battle.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I know you've helped a ton of entrepreneurs find their business, their way. Any tips that you would tell our audience if they're kind of thinking, hey, maybe I want to give this a try? What should they kind of prepare for? What should they look at before they prematurely make a jump?
Yeah, when it comes to buying businesses, it's one of those things where you learn best through experience. And if you can get into deals, obviously, if you can find a mentor that has that experience, that's a huge value. But if you can get into opportunities where you can invest alongside somebody else, I know you work with investors sometimes when you're doing deals now.
Mhm.
But if you can find an opportunity to invest and watch and participate, I think that is the most powerful way to get into the game. I tell people that we work with, because that's a lot of what we spend time doing. It's like, hey, let's just go and do a deal together. And it's funny, Jim was on a call who was in your group. And we're on a call with, this is a pastor that's kind of gone through our process. So we're on a call with a group of new guys. And, they've been at it for a few months and we're walking through the process together. And Jen a guy asked a question, just like, hey, like I can actually answer that, and goes through all this stuff and is talking through. And the guy's like, oh man, you know a lot about SEO and affiliate and content deals. Like, what course did you take to learn this? And she's like, I've never taken a course. Like, Ace and I did a deal together, and she's learned
Yeah.
everything through that process. And I think when it comes to the everything from finding the deal to talking to the seller to negotiating the right deal structure to doing the due diligence, in each one of those steps, once you've got that experience, it changes everything. When you're talking to a potential seller on a business and you speak their language and you're telling them that you own a similar business, this is what you've done with it, and they see like, okay, this guy knows what they're doing. But the average person is buying a business, and we also get people that ask us like, how do you get the deal structures that you get, and that kind of thing. Part of it is, if we are up against a bidder who has no experience. The average business buyer is buying a business for the very first time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking to that seller, and it's obvious like that. So it's like, okay, this guy has no idea what they're doing. What do you think they're going to want? They're going to want all of their cash up front. So when that person comes back and says, hey, I just want 25% of financing, 30% of financing, the person's still like, man, I'm probably not going to get that money.
Yeah.
when we've got somebody like you or like Jen's like, hey, I've done deals similar to this. You're speaking their language, and you say, I want 50%. It could be less, but they're like, man, like this guy is going to grow the business. I'm going to get my money back really quickly. I take 50% financing from him over 30 or 25% to that other guy any day of the week. So having that is the most important thing. And I think, the best way to get it is finding folks like you that are in it, doing it. It's the same thing that I did. I'm not, one of the things that we didn't have time to talk about is the fact that, I was very, very, very fortunate to have a guy who, could get absolutely nothing out of, there wasn't enough money that I could give him to make it worth him spending time with me. But literally I got an hour a quarter with this guy for a couple of years. And it was just a huge shift. In some cases, maybe an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But he's somebody who flipped hospitals. And, just when he told me that was, for me, mind blown.
Yeah.
Black kid from the inner city. It's like, wait a minute, you can buy a hospital? I thought that was like the government or something. Like, I never even thought about that. So, but having him really helped. And I wish I would have found him earlier, because there were a lot of mistakes that I had made, kind of bumping my way through the dark, trying to figure out things. But it's one of those things, you can't learn this stuff in school. It does have to be, you can't learn it in a video course or any of that. You really want to get out there and start to do it.
You're absolutely right. There was some stuff that I got bit by due diligence in the first go around that I saw again on the next deal and was able to negotiate my way out of it and actually get a better deal because of it. So would have never figured that out through courses and training and anything like that. So I know you're tight on time. So a couple of more direct questions. What are some of your favorite resources? I know you consume a lot of books and newsletters, things like that. Like, where if somebody was looking to get into the space or hone out some of their skills, what recommendations do you have and books that you suggest?
Yeah, I think the one of my favorite things is the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meetings. It's amazing opportunity to go through. That is basically a book that just goes through all the letters that Warren Buffett has done. I went to the actual meeting this year, and that's a beautiful experience. But even if you don't go to the meeting, getting that book with all of the letters to the shareholders from Berkshire Hathaway is a big one. And it's very specific. It's the whole thing. You can see every step from beginning to where it is now, which is an incredible thing.
Oh,
For doing deals, I recommend Aaron Claff's book, Pitch Anything. He's would be kind of my second mentor that I got to spend a lot of time with in San Diego. And, he just raised a ton of, I think he's raised maybe over $1 billion for different deals and that kind of thing in his lifetime. But Pitch Anything is like necessary reading. So those would be two that are at the top of the list.
very good. Perfect. Last question. Somebody who's interested in potentially leaving their jobs or starting something on the side, any big recommendation you have in terms of what they should be prepared for, or taking action? Like, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I remember a buddy of mine back when I first started working with folks, and which actually one of the reasons that I even started coaching and all of that was my mentor was like, yeah, like you got to figure out a way to duplicate yourself. Because you like doing these smaller deals. You don't want to do the larger deals because it's the multiple changes incredibly. So it's like you've got to figure out like how do you duplicate yourself, and that was kind of the impetus of this whole thing. And I was talking to a buddy of mine who's a pharmacist now, and we're talking through this, and I think one of the big mind shifts is what's the worst that can happen. And I think for some people, when they think about leaving their job, the automatic thing is, if I fail, I'm going to be the homeless person on the streets. I'm not going to have food to eat. My family's going to starve to death. It's just this very, very terrible thing. And it's like, no, like, let's literally like walk through it. I think, walking through what exactly will happen, and you realize like, it's probably not that bad. Like maybe I'll end up in my parents' basement for a little while, and I can go get another job and get back on my feet and deal with my annoying parents for 2 months. It just, you get into this reality of what it really looks like to fail. And I think it's interesting because it's this imagination thing that works against us that automatically goes to it's going to be the worst possible thing. So I think really getting comfortable with that and understanding that is one of the ways to and that was one of the things, because even it's funny, I mentioned this a second ago, but when I left school, it's, and that had been rammed into my head. It's like, you are a failure if you don't finish school. That it was still a tough thing for me. And so I remember going through that exercise of like, all right, like what's the worst that can happen if I don't go back to school? So I that's one of the exercises that I would recommend people do.
Perfect. Awesome. Let's end it here. If somebody wants to get in contact with you, or they're looking to learn more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Check out acechapman.com. On Instagram, it's ace.chapman, and a lot of free videos, education. You can ask specific questions there, and I'll do videos to answer them. Just go to YouTube and search Ace Chapman.
All right, perfect. Ace, thank you so much for your time. This was huge, and I can't wait to get you back on the podcast in a couple of months, couple of years. See how you're doing. See if you've got more recommendations for the audience. Sounds good.
Awesome, man. Good.
Right.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great one.
You too.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Mad Profit Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or the listening platform of your choice. Also, check us out at madxcapital.com for more useful information and resources to help you achieve your investing, entrepreneurial, and business goals. See you next week on the Mad Profit Podcast.